Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're undertaking something truly monumental. We are going to map out an epic timeline, a massive saga of resilience, exploitation, resistance, and ultimately triumph. We're diving deep into the story of India's long, incredibly arduous road to independence. We'll be tracing this journey all the way from the arrival of foreign traders in the 1600s, right up to the stroke of midnight in 1947. And we're going to explore this through data, through geography, and by walking the dual parallel paths of nonviolent mass movements and fiercely dedicated armed revolutionaries. So get comfortable, really tune in, and let's honor this incredible history together.
Okay, let's dive right into this with a number that honestly just floors me every single time I see it: 2%. Before colonial rule, India was an absolute manufacturing powerhouse, contributing a massive 27% of global manufacturing exports. But by the time the British Raj finally came to an end, that number had plummeted to a staggering 2%. I mean, how on earth does a thriving global economic engine get dismantled so thoroughly? Well, that right there is the foundational question of the entire independence struggle.
To truly understand that catastrophic drop, we have to establish our chronological scope. You see, the story doesn't just start in 1947 or even 1857. It actually begins way back in 1600 with the formation of the British East India Company. Over the next couple of centuries, they slowly transitioned from mere traders to outright rulers. A pivotal moment was the Battle of Plassey in 1757, which massively expanded their territorial control. Then, by 1813, the company's state-granted monopoly ended. What that did was open the floodgates for British manufactured goods to just pour into India. This steady, relentless accumulation of both economic and military dominance perfectly set the stage for the massive eruption of discontent that would eventually hit in 1857.
Section 1. The Colonial Economic Drain: Deindustrialization and Plunder. The stark reality of British policy in India was the systematic dismantling of traditional Indian industries. And the whole point of this was to feed the Industrial Revolution back in Britain. You can actually see this deindustrialization play out incredibly clearly in the data. Back under the Mughal Empire in 1600, about 15% of the population lived in urban centers, and the secondary sector, meaning manufacturing and industry, made up 18.2% of the economy. Fast forward to British India in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and that secondary sector has shrunk down to just 11.2%, accompanied by a major drop in urbanization. Why did this happen? It's because the colonial government committed to policies that effectively turned India into a massive supplier of cheap raw materials, like raw cotton, which was then shipped off to Manchester. Then, those finished textiles were dumped right back into the captive Indian market, entirely duty-free. Traditional Indian weavers literally couldn't compete with that. As historian Rajat Kanta Ray noted in the sources we analyzed for this explainer, this new economy was viewed by a lot of people as practically a form of plunder. This immense economic devastation, which even played a huge role in horrors like the Great Bengal Famine of 1770, where around 10 million people died, sowed the deep seeds of immense, widespread anger. Section 2. The First Sparks: The Rebellion of 1857.
Of course, all that pent-up anger just couldn't be contained forever. Lakshmi Bai, the Rani of Jhansi, is one of the most iconic, legendary figures of this eventual explosion of violence. But what exactly caused it? Well, it was a volatile combination of invasive social reforms, incredibly harsh land taxes, and arrogant expansionist policies like the Doctrine of Lapse. That doctrine denied adopted heirs the right to inherit their kingdoms, which is exactly how the Rani of Jhansi lost hers. The final, infamous catalyst, though, involved the sepoys, the Indian soldiers who actually made up the bulk of the company's army. A rumor began circulating that the new Enfield rifle cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat. Since soldiers had to bite the cartridges to open them, this was deeply sacrilegious to both Hindus and Muslims, and it became the ultimate spark. On May 10, 1857, sepoys in merit broke ranks, marched all the way to Delhi, and asked the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah II to lead them. This rebellion was fierce, it spread widely across northern and central India, and it was devastatingly costly in terms of human lives. So, the absolutely crucial point here is, what did 1857 actually achieve? While it obviously didn't result in immediate independence, it was an absolute watershed moment. The British woke up and realized that a private trading corporation simply could no longer govern an entire subcontinent. Through the Government of India Act in 1858, the East India Company was completely dissolved. Absolute power was transferred directly to the British Crown. The army was entirely reorganized and the financial systems were overhauled. India was officially now the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, ruled directly from London. But here's the thing. Direct rule only evolved the nature of Indian resistance. As we move into the 20th century, the landscape shifts completely. In 1885, the Indian National Congress, or the INC, was formed. Now, initially, they were just seeking greater economic rights, but the tone shifted radically after the British controversially partitioned Bengal in 1905. The moderate reformist agenda quickly gave way to a hardened demand for self-rule, and this ultimately culminated in massive, organized, nationwide campaigns like the Non-Cooperation Movement in 1920 and the definitive, unwavering declaration of Purna Swaraj, complete independence, in 1930.
Section 3. The dual paths. Mass mobilization.
As the freedom struggle gained momentum, it sort of forked into two tracks. The path of mass mobilization was undoubtedly defined by Mahatma Gandhi. He managed to transform the Indian National Congress from what was essentially a bourgeois intellectual club into a formidable, genuinely nationwide mass movement. Following the harsh suspension of civil liberties under the Rowlatt Act in 1919, Gandhi launched the Non-Cooperation Movement in 1920. His strategy was brilliant in its sheer simplicity. Revoke all cooperation. Resign from your government posts, leave British schools, and crucially, boycott British goods entirely. Gandhi heavily promoted the charkha, the traditional spinning wheel, encouraging people to make khadi cloth locally. And you know what? It worked. By 1936, 62% of all cloth sold in India was locally made. Later on, during the famous 1930 salt satyagraha, tens of millions of people revolted peacefully, proving the immense, world-shifting power of his struggle-truce-struggle strategy.
To really grasp the sheer political power this mass mobilization generated, we just have to look at the data from the 1937 Indian provincial elections. These were held under the Government of India Act 1935, which enfranchised roughly 30 million people. And the results were pretty staggering. The Indian National Congress won 706 of the roughly 1,586 contested seats. That massive victory allowed them to form governments in 7 different provinces. Meanwhile, the All India Muslim League secured 111 seats, and regional parties like the landlord-dominated Unionist Party took 137.
When we look at the geographic breakdown of those elections, you can see just how far the Indian National Congress had reached. They had built a true, incredibly effective nationwide political machinery. But it also reveals the deep complexities of the electorate at the time. There was a very distinct political landscape in Bengal, for instance, with the Krishak Proja Party, and significant strength from the Unionist Party over in Punjab. It was right around here that the Muslim League, under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, realized that despite having separate electorates, they hadn't quite captured the majority of the overall Muslim vote yet. This realization prompted some really intense nationwide touring and a massive political realignment in the years that followed. It's a fascinating snapshot of a deeply complex, vibrant, and rapidly evolving political ecosystem.
Section 4. The dual paths. The revolutionary underground.
Now, we absolutely must turn to the other parallel track of the freedom struggle. Because while the Congress pursued nonviolence and electoral politics, there were many revolutionaries who were deeply, deeply disillusioned by the painfully slow pace of reform and the frequent halting of those mass movements. So, underground organizations sprouted up to directly challenge British rule through armed resistance. Over in Bengal, you had the Anushilan Samiti, which was a highly centralized organization led by figures like Aurobindo Ghosh, as well as the Yuganthar Group, which operated as more of a looser alliance of local leaders. Up in northern India, you had the Hindustan Republican Association, which actually later added socialist to its name, influenced by the Russian Revolution. Their goal? To establish a federal republic of the United States of India, and they were willing to do it by force. These revolutionary groups operated an intense underground war. They executed targeted assassinations, daring train robberies like the famous Kokori incident, and bombings, all designed to strike absolute terror into the colonial administration. Figures like Bhagat Singh, who was tragically executed at just 23 years old after a politically motivated assassination and the bombing of the Central Assembly, became immensely popular martyrs. Their sacrifices forced the mainstream non-violent movement to seriously introspect. We also have figures like Subhash Chandra Bose, a highly charismatic former leader of the Congress who radically parted ways with Gandhi's non-violent approach entirely. During World War II, Bose made the very controversial, pragmatic decision to ally with Axis powers, specifically Japan and Germany, forming the Indian National Army from prisoners of war. His hope was to drive the British out of India by sheer military force. Both of these paths, The quiet resilience of the spinning wheel and the militant force of the rifle were driven by the exact same fervent, unwavering desire for a free India. And this brings us right to the acceleration phase. World War II changed absolutely everything. In 1939, the British Viceroy unilaterally declared India a belligerent in the war without consulting a single elected Indian representative. In protest, all Congress ministries immediately resigned. This set off a chaotic, incredibly rapid chain of events. You have the massive Quit India movement in 1942, terrifying post-war armed mutinies in 1946, and finally, at long last, independence in 1947. Section 5. The Final Push. Quit India and the Post-War Crisis. By this point in the timeline, the British Raj was quite literally collapsing under the weight of its own post-war exhaustion and the immense, unyielding pressure coming from the Indian populace. In 1942, Gandhi and the Congress demanded an immediate end to colonial rule with the historic Quit India movement. The British responded with absolute, brutal suppression, imprisoning tens of thousands of Indian leaders for the entire duration of the war. But the real breaking point came right after the war ended. In early 1946, major mutinies broke out in the armed services, most notably the Royal Indian Navy Mutiny and the Royal Air Force mutinies. When you combined that internal military rebellion with the massive public outrage over the trials of Subhash Chandra Bose's Indian National Army soldiers, the British military brass realized a terrifying truth. They could no longer rely on Indian forces to maintain control. The subcontinent had simply become entirely ungovernable for the British. The realization of a dream so long held, so deeply fought for, was finally at hand. Think back to December 1929, on the banks of the Ravi River, when Jawaharlal Nehru unfurled the tricolor flag and the Congress issued this definitive, world-changing declaration. Complete independence from British rule would, henceforth, be the goal. No more talking about dominion status, no more political compromises. Purna Swaraj. The sheer emotional weight of that promise is what carried the Indian people through nearly 2 more decades of brutal struggle, widespread imprisonment, and unimaginable sacrifice.
Section 6, 1947. Independence and Tribute.
The spinning wheel flag, adopted during the Purna Swaraj movement, featured the charkha. It was a profound, deeply resonant symbol of a self-reliant, incredibly resilient India that absolutely refused to be an economic captive any longer. At the stroke of midnight on August 15, 1947, India awoke to life and freedom. But as we celebrate that, we must always acknowledge that this monumental joy was inextricably linked with the profound, heartbreaking tragedy of partition. It created the sovereign dominions of India and Pakistan, but it was accompanied by devastating communal violence and one of the largest, most tragic mass displacements in human history. The cost of this freedom was unimaginably high.
As we conclude this explainer, I think we have to ask ourselves, how do we continue to honor the immense cost of that 2% economic struggle today? Are we upholding the deep resilience built by both the spinning wheel and the revolution? Let us take a moment of real, deep reverence right now. We honor the millions of nameless, everyday citizens who spun cloth, who marched to the sea, who faced down police batons without lifting a single hand in violence. We honor the brilliant political minds who built a democratic framework from the absolute ground up. And we bow to the fiercely passionate revolutionaries, the brave young men and women who willingly walked the gallows, and the soldiers who fought in the remote jungles of Burma, believing with all their hearts that their blood would water the seeds of a free republic. Their countless sacrifices forged the independent nation we celebrate today. Wishing every single one of you a proud and happy Independence Day. Jai Hind.